Folks, 2 lords, only 1 8 peaks, however that works, 1 giant squig, and 1 giant grudge is about to be reckoned on the battlefield here today. We have Skarsnik, and he has brought a few black orcs, but otherwise he has a very Gobbo-centric army. You can see he's actually supported by a Gobbo shaman and a Gobbo big boss. And we're going to have ourselves a good old-fashioned grudge match against Belegar Ironhammer to see who really is the true king under Karak 8 Peaks. And for the Gobbo army, there's going to be 4 units of squig herds. I love the pick of squig herds versus dwarves. I think it's a fun one, and it can be decent versus infantry or cleaning up skirmishers. Gives you a little bit of mobility. There is a a Doom Diver catapult here, which is very appropriate for the goblins, like launching themselves to their death in order to kill the Dawi. And then over here, we have some nasty skulkers in a big line with some night goblins and warlords boys. Some of these are fanatic units as well, so they'll be throwing their fanatics into the fight. And then we have a Teeth Robbers chariot over here. So yeah, the Teeth Robbers will be looking for some teeth to rob, of course, and maybe some beard ripping as well. And speaking of beards, here is Lord Belegar Ironhammer, hoping to take permanent control of Karak 8 Peaks. He's got himself an army here of longbeards with great weapons, some warriors with great weapons, dwarf warriors, miners with blasting charges, some slayers, the dragonback slayers. One of my favorite picks of all is the goblobber. Whenever you're fighting goblins, you definitely need to be launching rocks back at them that have a goblin tied to it. It is just appropriate. And Belegar has really gone minimal range, other than the the goblobber, grudge thrower, and it is a good way to return the grudges. If you look at the dwarf line here, the front line is some warriors and longbeards. Longbeards are not a good offensive weapon, but they are a pain in the butt for goblin troops to chew through because they have very high defense. And so a lot of times what will happen is, even with the longbeards not necessarily winning offensively in a fight, they will win from a leadership perspective. And then you've got your great weapon variants either towards the flank or in a second line. And this is a good way to fight as the dwarves. The dwarves tend to last a long time in a fight because of their leadership and armor. And so if you fight in a reserve system, it can be quite good if you're able to exhaust your opponent, have them throwing everything into a flank, get their troops exhausted from running across the map to close the distance, and then fighting through the initial armor. You can use that to your advantage. Anyway, also supporting Belegar is a runesmith. The runesmith has the Master Wrath and Ruin, which is a good way to slow down chariots, cavalry, or just other fast-moving units. This is a solid pick for the dwarves, and we're going to let things play out a little here. As far as the Slayer situation, there's actually 2 Slayers and then the Dragonback Slayers, so hopefully this gives you all a view of the battlefield now. The Goblins are going to be able to take control of this hill. The dwarves have ceded it because they're playing defensively, which is definitely not a foreign idea for the Dawi. In fact, that's how they operate probably under most circumstances. So the goblins are going to have to push their rock lobber to the top of the hill. Meanwhile, they are moving their vanguard force closer and kind of rolling in last with the black orcs and their leadership, but they're using the hill for cover at the moment. It's a good idea to keep the black orcs back and I think let some other units begin the fight. However, you do have to be careful playing as goblins. You can't let your leadership lag too far behind your goblin line. In fact, I think this is one of the ways in which Gobbo big bosses can be pretty helpful, and I would love to have seen a couple of Gobbo big bosses here, each one on kind of a side of this cheap goblin line, and it adds a lot of leadership support. You can also use chevrons if you have some money left as a way to make your goblins go farther, because that's definitely going to be your challenge. They have the tools offensively to hurt the dwarves very badly. It's the leadership that is the question. Now, black orcs don't have so much of that leadership question. The big challenge you face with bringing black orcs against dwarves is that you survive the artillery barrage. Back in the day, you had to survive the runesmiths using the Master Ruin on them, and that's what I would do back in the day. I was a big fan of a double runesmith build against the greenskins because you could pretty much get rid of their best infantry and then hope that the rest of their infantry would peter out against all of your armor and leadership. So you can see at this point that the rock lobber is going to send its first goblin back out of captivity and return him to his own kin. And to good effect, I might add. A couple of hits with the rock lobber will lead any goblin artillery or greenskin artillery, which I think is typically manned by goblins. It will lead them to rout. The Goblobber is just an excellent choice to take out enemy artillery because it hurts leadership so badly. On a flatter map, it can combine very nicely with a cannon, and it can take out enemy artillery very quickly. The cannon doing some damage, and then the Goblobber doing the leadership damage. So the Goblobber is a tool that I think almost no dwarf should leave home without. So you're going to see a bit of artillery trading here, but like I said, there is no goblin artillery that can trade with the Goblobber. Not for any extended amount of time. Take a look at the leadership here. It's very low for the Doom Divers. One more solid hit, and they are going to be toast. And that'll do it right there. I'll bet you that hit. Yep. Oh my gosh, that was disgusting. So yeah, there's the end of the Doom Diver catapult for now. Now, of course, being a greenskin unit, it will come back. There is some benefit to what just happened there. Not a lot, but at least it held the attention of the Goblobber rather than the Goblobber firing at Black Orcs. So I don't think the pick of an artillery unit is completely pointless here because your Black Orcs are going to need some cover. And an artillery piece left unchecked by the dwarves is very dangerous because it can sit back and hardly be threatened because the dwarves just don't have the mobility to go threaten it. And you can see they're going to reload the Goblobber, and they are going to open fire on the Black Orcs, and this is an appropriate target. They won't break the leadership of the Black Orcs, but the Goblobber has excellent armor-piercing values, and it can be used to great effect to really hurt the leadership, to really hurt the unit counts of the Greenskins. You can see the Squigs moving in along the left flank. They're going to get past the edge of the dwarf formation and threaten the rear, while the Vanguard attack comes from the complete opposite side. The Goblin player may have been hoping that the dwarves would turn more attention towards the Squigs, but I think at this point some of these units are visible. In fact, some of the Fanatics go off a little bit early here, and the dwarves are able to retreat from the Fanatics, so this is a good thing for the dwarves. The Runesmith is going to be left to lead the way here against the Night Goblins on this flank, while Belegar and his Slayers are attempting to head off the Squigs. So at this point, the gig is up, and the dwarf player does know what the goblins intend. And here comes the goblin hit. Greenskins always hit hard and do a lot of damage fast, and we will see whether they're able to do enough damage. See the Skulkers coming in. Skulkers are a great unit. Or actually, those were Night Gobbos. Here's the Skulkers. Those are the Night Gobbos. Woo! The failure of these miners with blasting charges to be tied down on this flank is going to cost big time. You can see that those nasty Skulkers got KO'd in one volley. Low armor units do very poorly against miners with blasting charges, so look at that, 52 kills. The Squigs would have been needed to help break up the miners with blasting charges to avoid that from happening, because you can see there, the Longbeards and their leadership were able to withstand it. Now, look at the damage done to these Black Orcs before combat even gets started. That's huge. Real big. Because now the Greenskins are charging on in, and they're just going all out on one flank. Since there's not a ton of skirmishers here for the dwarves, that's not an enormous risk, but getting that blob in there is a big risk with these blasting charges. They've still got just a few. The Greenskins could spread out more here, but if they spread out, they also run the risk of getting picked off individually by units that are just too strong. So in this case, the Greenskin player is going to opt for a more coherent infantry line. Over here, the Squigs came in and were doing some flank attacks, but then they went on a rampage, which allowed the Slayers to get all over them. So the Squigs are going to be mostly ineffectual at the moment, and Belegar's army is starting off pretty well so far. They've managed to use all their miners, but look here, the Fanatics are let loose, and it rips a huge swath through the dwarf infantry there, and so the dwarves get a little bit of payback from the Greenskins. That was a brutal hit from those Fanatics, and you can see it starts to collapse a little bit of the line here. Though the dwarves do have reinforcements out here, we got a warrior with great weapon, more Slayers, and all these units are beginning to activate back towards the main fight, but as typical with the Greenskins, there's going to be kind of a second wave here as the nasty Skulkers who were initially routed are going to come back, and this can be pretty dangerous for the dwarves at times, especially if they've ended up getting crowded up in the wrong place, or they end up getting surrounded by units coming back from routing. It can be pretty bad. Belegar is going to come over, and he is going to get into a fight head-on with the Gobbo King and his Squig. You can see Gobla here looking to get some tasty treats, some ironclad morsels. Belegar is a pretty tanky unit model. He's another one that's kind of a typical dwarf if you take a look at his stats. Really good weapon damage. It's not specifically armor piercing. You don't need a ton of that versus greenskins usually. He's just got a really good shield. And you can see his melee attack is absurdly high right now because of Revenge Incarnate. So it does allow him to get some really good work done, despite the fact that he's no, like, Grombrindle or something else like that. Look at that. Greenskins are trucking their way through over here. Look, 90 kills already on the Black Orcs. Black Orcs are brutal in this fight, and the Dwarves need to get rid of them. This unit was dealt with pretty well, and you can see it limited the number of kills. And the Greenskins definitely going to be facing some leadership issues, though the fight between Belegar and Skarsnik wasn't bad because these Black Orcs were there to support. It's going to drive Belegar back, which is kind of a grudging. He's going to have to retreat temporarily and try and keep himself safe. The Dwarves, meanwhile, are trying to activate their reinforcements. They've had to drive off the Squig herds for a second time. You can see those herds being driven back, and now the Dwarves should have reinforcements. And I want you all to take note of a few things here. Black Orcs, very tired. Nasty Skulkers, very tired. You look at all these units over here, exhausted. Black Orcs, exhausted. Look at the Dwarf reinforcements. Fresh. Over here, you've just got active. So there's a lot of Dwarf reinforcements here that are in pretty good shape. You can see Skarsnik does have his ability to make things unseen. He's popping off all of his abilities. It doesn't really matter at this point because his units are seen and are spottable. Here comes the second wave of Dwarf reinforcement. You can see there's Itchy Nuisance coming in here. Nice support from the Gabo Shaman. And this just ends up into a big axe to grind. You can see a Gabo Big Boss attempting to get to Belegar. Belegar is going to be out here dueling him. And he's going to have another, or sorry, that's the Shaman. And then the Big Boss comes in as well. Belegar doing some nice karate kicks there. And here comes the reinforcements for the Dwarves. You can see the Dragonback Slayers are here now too. And the Dragonback Slayers, not a good matchup against Black Orcs. But it is going to be a big problem. You can see that the power bar is tilting in favor of Belegar because of how many Dwarves are left. And then not only that, the forces of Skarsnik are kind of petering out. And this is just a challenge you face playing the lower leadership Greenskin faction against the Dwarves is you kind of have to do really good damage very early in the fight. And I think here, in order to do that damage more effectively, he probably would have needed to combine some of the Squig use with his line. You know, like having that Goblin line get a little bit of support from some Squigs. You're going to have to break a couple of Dwarf units near instantly. If you use your Wah properly, time it with some Goblins, maybe even some Fanatics, and hit really hard with some Squigs and Infantry, you can sometimes kind of break up a flank of Dwarves. And then you can use a unit like the Teeth Robbers. Instead of bringing it in early, per se, you can use a unit like the Teeth Robbers to chase off routing Dwarf units if you are lucky enough to put them to rout. Longbeards, it won't work. So you kind of have to pick your target carefully, I feel like, with the Greenskins. Longbeards just have insane leadership. They are very difficult to get off the field quickly. So you really want to target units like Miners or Dwarf Warriors with great weapons. You got to clear out some of that Dwarf chaff early on because Dwarf chaff is very different than typical chaff. They don't really have chaff, so to speak, right? They do, in a way. But it's very well armored and shielded and has very good leadership, all things considered. In fact, Dwarf Warriors, while not being a good offensive weapon, are very decent for their price because you're not going to get a lot of other infantry at that cost level that have that kind of leadership and armor. So what they lack in offense, they make up for in leadership and defense. And so I feel like that not a bad overall design for the army here. There's probably a couple things that could have been improved upon a little, but not a terrible idea. You got armor piercing with the Squigs, you got armor piercing with the Skulkers. You're going to need that. Armor piercing with the Black Orcs. You're going to have this type of thing. I felt like the Greenskins did get a little blobbed, and they should have been looking to pick off key targets and force engagements that the Dwarves don't want. Maybe you avoid the Longbeards early on, and you go for the Dwarf Warriors, try and swarm and knock them out. So for instance, I know there was a warrior with great weapon. Now you'd have to watch out for Slayer support, but if you can get around a warrior with great weapon, hit it from in front and behind with a Squig unit, you can sometimes put those units out of commission very quickly. I think Gabo Big Boss support is important. He needed the Shaman here as well. But yeah, you got to use those Gabo leaders fairly close to the infantry in order to keep their leadership up as well. Sometimes you want some chevrons and stuff. The Black Orcs here, one of them was doing pretty good. But you can see not even it picked up a chevron, even with 135 kills. It was doing well. It got into combat in a good way, but again, just wasn't able to spend enough time in battle because of the loss of leadership due to army losses. Timing is very critical, I think, with these Goblin rushes. It's a very fun match here between Thane of Tauren and Bastos FC. I love seeing a good grudge match like this between two lords that have a lot of lore together. It's a lot of fun. The Gabos didn't pull it off this time, but I felt like it was a good opportunity to talk about this matchup a little. Obviously, armor and defense leadership on the side of the dwarves, and it's really up to the greenskin player on how they're going to play offense and whether or not they can do it effectively. Another thing that would have been interesting here that the dwarves would have probably struggled with would have been if there had been a lot of goblin archers. The dwarves would have been in some pretty bad shape potentially here. They have a lot of slayers where they could try and threaten them, but if you had a lot of goblin archers here, you might be able to pull dwarf units out. The only unit they have to fight those archers is a goblobber. Or sorry, the goblobber. I get the rocklobber and goblobber confused in my head. With just the one goblobber, and if there's multiple goblin archers, yeah, there's a problem here for the dwarves. They're going to start getting picked at. And you can pick at these unshielded units. You can pick at the slayers after you've been able to get the goblobber out of commission. So that's another way that the goblins can play this to be pretty effective. I think Morgrub's Mangy Marauders is another interesting pick versus the dwarves. If you can get them on a flank, it's risky because if the dwarves bring quarrelers or rangers, it's a lot harder to use them. But in this case, Morgrub's Mangy Marauders would have been devastating because they could have sat out on a flank for a long time just unloading into unshielded dwarf units like the miners or the warriors with great weapons or even the longbeards with great weapons, and it's armor-piercing ammo. So there are a lot of tools that goblins have. It's just a matter of getting them into the right place at the right time and taking care of that battle. Anyway, thanks to those two players for submitting this. I will have some more team battles for y'all coming up later in the weekend. Do hope you enjoyed this one. HeirofCarthage signing out for now. I will see you soon.